ahead and get started. First of all, welcome. We're so excited to be offering this webinar to you today. Thank you for joining us, and taking time away from, I know, what must be very busy schedules you all have. So just, sending some appreciations and some care in this difficult time for all of us. So before we get started and before I hand it over to our presenter today, I want to do a quick round of housekeeping and just some, tech announcements. So this webinar will be recorded or is being recorded, and we will share the webinar on our website. I will send the webinar recording to everybody after it's ready within a week of today. And feel free to send that recording out to your networks, whoever may be interested. During the webinar, feel free to leave any questions that you have or any just thoughts and reflections in the chat box. Towards the end of the presentation, we will have a little bit of time to address some of your questions and answers. And if we don't get around to the questions, we'll do our best to kind of communicate via email with you afterwards to get some of those questions addressed. We do have live captioning today. If you just give me a little bit of time to set it up, I'll notify the chat box once that's all set and ready for you, but we do have that on standby. Other than that, I think that's all the tech intros that I have. I want to quickly introduce myself and my organization. So I'm Shirley Liu from the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence. We're a national resource center on gender-based violence affecting Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. We don't do direct services, but we do provide training, technical assistance, advocacy and policy advocacy, resources, consultation to advocates and to systems representatives who interact with survivors of violence. So you can, I'm sure many of you are familiar with us and what we do, so don't want to spend too much time on that. And then last of all, I want to introduce our amazing presenter here today, Nahid Samadi Barham. She is from the Women for Afghan Women based in New York City. And just a little bit of the context for today's webinar. As we all know, and some of us have been seeing in our communities, our families, our friends, many recent evacuees from Afghanistan are now in the process of starting new lives here in the US. And we at API-GBV have been in contact, with the State Department, with USAID, and amazing agencies like Women for Afghan Women for the last few months to figure out, what's the best way that we as a community, we as a movement, we just as a society can respond to their needs. In terms of social services, in terms of mental health services, COVID services, just community services, and gender-based violence cases that might arise. And so we're so lucky to have Nahid here today with us. She's really been on the ground doing all the work and connection and serving these recent arrivals. So just to briefly introduce her to you before I pass it over to her. Nahid and her family migrated to Pakistan after her mother was killed in an explosion in Afghanistan. By the age of 18, Nahid was teaching English to Afghan women in Pakistan. She eventually moved to the US, where she graduated with a Bachelor of Arts from Queen's College and has moved up the ranks at Women for Afghan Women, from a volunteer over 10 years ago to program director of Women for Afghan Women's New York Community Center. Today, she holds the position of the organization's United States Country Director. Serving on several boards and committees, Nahid is an adjunct professor at Queen's College and has won numerous awards for her service to the community and to domestic violence survivors. So I'm going to turn it over now to Nahid. I will still be here kind of in the background, handling any tech issues or anything that will come up. Thank you so much, Nahid.
Thank you. Hi, good morning, good afternoon for people who are on East Coast. or West Coast. Thank you so much for joining this session. It's a very timely session, knowing what we are witnessing in our communities. Majority of Afghan refugees are starting to resettle in our neighborhoods, and knowing about the community and about cultural sensitivity, especially around domestic violence, I think is very important for all of us who are working in this field. So I'm gonna just briefly talk about what the organization does, and then I will touch on what domestic violence look like in our community. So if I have the slides now, that will be good.
Yes, 1 second.
So Women for Afghan Women is an organization that have provided direct services for the Afghan immigrant community, but it's not limited to only Afghans. We also serve South Asian and Muslim community in New York for over 20 years. Our mission is the empowerment of women and girls, both here in the United States as well as inside Afghanistan. We are the largest organization that provide the largest women rights organization inside Afghanistan that works inside Afghanistan globally. We have over 1,200 local Afghan staff and run the largest number of shelters in the country. We had 11 shelters for survivors of domestic violence in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, as of now, our services are in pause because of the current government, and we are not able to operate part of our work. Here in the United States, we have been providing the community with our organization was founded before 9/11, and when it was founded, we were not we did not know what the community need was here, because the aim was to go inside Afghanistan and serve the community inside Afghanistan. But the person who wanted to fund an organization that will work for Afghan women could not find an agency here in the East Coast to support. So they tried to find out the community, and when they found out the community, they realized the need was as great as it would have been in Afghanistan. So they started Women for Afghan Women's New York Community Center, where we have been providing the South Asian, Muslim, and Afghan community with educational programs. That's our adult education, youth education, that includes tutoring, leadership programs, legal services for immigrants, as well as support to survivors of domestic violence. Next slide, please. I'm sure a majority of you know what are the categories of domestic violence. So I will just touch upon very quickly on these issues of domestic violence is not only, which in many of communities, including our community, if a woman is not being beaten up, that's not violence. And I think educating the community around that there are other forms of violence that can happen in your life and you do not recognize that. That is obviously verbal, psychological, sexual, financial, and physical. So in many of the community, I'm sure, including the Afghan community, the women do not understand that. I will, when I first came to United States, I would be in a place where Afghans were, and I would talk to them, and they would say, oh, I can only talk to my family when my husband is at home, and he will get me the calling card. I'm talking about 15 years ago. He would get me the calling card, then that's the only time I'm allowed to talk to my family, when he is there. But that was not considered as violence. That was not considered as abuse. And similarly, people would say that, oh, I can't buy anything because I'm not allowed to. Since my husband is the only one who's working, he has to give me money so that I can go buy the food that I want. Or I'm not allowed to do the grocery shopping. My husband does the grocery shopping and he brings what he wants, and then I'm gonna cook. So these were forms that I would see in the community, but not reported as domestic violence. And what makes this easy for people to understand, I think doing a lot of education around this, make the community understand what forms of abuse are and what are some of the forms of domestic violence. Next slides, please. We all know that also domestic violence is not included, not limited to one culture or one ethnic group or one religion. We know that the domestic violence happens in every culture, in every religion, in every ethnic group. So we should not be saying, oh, there is more violence in Muslim communities than in Jewish community, or there is more violence in Hindus than in Christian communities, or there is more violence in Pakistani community than Afghan community. I just want to make that clear that we know that only in 2020, only within the New York City, we had over 22,000 reported cases of domestic violence across the city. And that means that it was not limited only to one religion. It was not limited to only one community. I think that itself for advocates, I'm sure none of the advocates would do it, but for people who just stereotype domestic violence is really hurting the community. Next slide, please. We have obviously assisted over 1,000 survivors of domestic violence since 2001. As I mentioned at the beginning, when I came to the organization, in 2007, we only had maybe 2 reported cases of domestic violence, but in 2021, we assisted over 364 cases of domestic violence. That means that it does not mean that the violence increased in the community. It means that our community now feels comfortable to come forward and report the incident, where in the past it was a very taboo topic, and if the woman would have reported it, it was always the woman to be blamed for reporting it. You are not a good wife, you cannot take care of your family, your husband is not happy from you. These were all the stigmas that the other members in the community would put on women. So again, the important things in this is that making sure that we provide culturally sensitive education around this to the community. We obviously, none of us are here to divide the families, none of us are here to separate the families, and divorce is always not the answer, but how can we educate the community in order for them to have a peaceful life? Next, please. So again, I mentioned earlier that domestic violence was a very taboo topic to discuss in the community. As I mentioned, I would see people. I also, when I first came, I saw a woman had bruises in his face, and she did tell me that she was beaten up by her husband outside of the organization in a just informal place. But then when we were in the office, nobody would report it. And if, again, because the topic was so taboo, people wouldn't even bring it up. The other issue with that was that a lot of people would, so how Women for Afghan Women try to break that taboo, as I mentioned earlier, with providing a large number of educational sessions in the community. We started doing awareness program through a program that's called Monthly Women Circle. We still have it, and we would bring speakers who were expert on the topic, and we would discuss it, and we would translate it in the languages that the women were comfortable with. And that's how people, after the session would end, 1 or 2 of them would come in and say, oh, this happened to me, and I felt ashamed to be reporting it. And the other issue that a lot of these families were not able to report this was a lot of people were not able to speak the languages. Now that when we started this work in the community, our staff were able to speak Farsi, Dari, Pashto, Urdu, and Hindi. And that really make it comfortable for a majority of our community members to come forward and discuss it. Where in the past, even if there was an incident and it was reported, they had been given to a caseworker who could not even understand the language that they were speaking. And obviously that's improving a little bit in the city, even we're not within with Women for Afghan Women, but outside of Women for Afghan Women, there are interpreters over the phone that can help. But I want to just make one thing clear at this point, that is, there is a difference between Dari and Farsi. Dari is spoken in Afghanistan, Farsi is spoken in Iran. They are close to each other, but they are not the same language, especially when it comes into technical words on translating in the court, for example. A Farsi speaker will not be able to say 100% of what an Afghan Dari speaker is communicating. Similarly, the Pashto is also, we have Pashto spoken in Afghanistan and Pashto spoken in Pakistan. Those are two different languages. So when you work with a client who's from Afghanistan, please make sure you have a Dari or Pashto speaker who is from Afghanistan. With both of those parts, we also have Urdu. I know that the majority of our Afghan people, when they go to court, they say, okay, if you don't have a Farsi or Pashto speaker, get me an Urdu speaker. But the Afghans do not know. Urdu is not a national language in Afghanistan, and people do not speak that well. They only know it from movies that they have watched, and that's not something that they will be able to communicate what they really want to. The other issue was obviously the religious understanding of domestic violence. In our community largely is a Muslim population, and they understand the right that they do not understand the rights that has been given to women in Islam, and because majority of the women that we serve are not educated and not even in their own language, so they do not have an official education on Islam. It's just Islam that they have learned in Arabic and do not even understand the meaning. So a lot of the time that interpretation comes from people that is not really into understanding of women's rights. But in certain cases, that because our community is so religious, they really wanted to involve the imams in the cases. They wanted to get back to their husband, but they wanted the imam's involvement. For us to involve the imam, we definitely obviously do what the wishes of the family is, but we needed to do training to the local imams here in New York. We have 4 Afghan local imams where we were able to do trainings for them, 2 series of trainings, one's on understanding of domestic violence and prevention, and the second one about the resources and how could the imams help. Yeah, thank you. The next one, please. So there is a lot of warning signs when you see somebody in the community. So a lot of our students who would come here, they would never come and report as somebody who want to report or talk about a domestic violence issue. They would come for many other reasons, whether they would come for our ESL classes or come for helping them with social services. And as you would talk with them and you would find out what the issues were, you would see the signs in them. You would see that they would tell you that they are scared because their husband may deport them. They are scared because they don't have their legal documentation with them. And that was a lot of the time we had clients who were scared of leaving an abusive situation because their legal documentation were not with them. And they were also threatening that if they will do something, they will take the kids away, the kids will be taken away from them. In Afghanistan, if husband and wife get separated, 95% of the time the children goes to the father. And that was something that people think that the same exact thing will happen here. Also, a lot of the time that people who are getting here, people say that, oh my God, you report about domestic violence, you are Americanized, you forgot about your culture, our issue should be solved inside the house, we have to deal with it in our way. So because of all these shames and that people would put and blame the woman majority of the time, was the reasons that you would see the signs and warning signs in a survivor, but who could not report. Or forcing, for example, a woman not to go to work, forcing a woman to wear a job or headscarves, and or having the, as I mentioned earlier, like some of the controlling signs of women not being allowed to talk to her family unless the husband is present in the room. So these are some of the warning signs that you would see. You may work with a woman who may not come to you as somebody who can report domestic violence, but as you work with the woman, I think these are the signs that you have to notice when they talk to you. Next slide, please. And obviously, why do people stay? In many cases, when people say, oh my God, if she's in such an abusive situation, why is she still staying? And we all know that the most difficult decision that a woman or anyone makes in a relationship when it comes to leaving a situation is, especially for an immigrant community, is the fear that they have. They might leave this, they don't know, maybe their husband will kill them, maybe the husband will take the children with them, as I mentioned earlier, or the lack of money and resources. I mentioned majority of the families, the immigrant families that we work with, the husband is the breadwinner at home. The wives are mostly sitting home and being not being able to bring any income at home. So they're scared if we leave, what will happen? And obviously language barrier and immigration status is another thing, which I explained earlier, that if a woman cannot speak, she's not sure where to go and where to ask for help, and scared that because I came through my husband and I may be deported back to Afghanistan. Or maintaining the family like they want to have a family for their children, and scaring that if I leave, they may take my children. And also in many cases, when it comes to fear, there is also the fear of my own family will not accept me as a daughter. So, or my community will not accept me once I go and file for separation or divorce, or even a police report. And we will go, do you want to go to the next slide? Thank you. Sure, please tell me if you guys want to break out of the session or anything at any point. Stop me also if there is anything that's coming up. The effect of domestic violence on children. I'm sure this is very similar to many of other communities, as children who are exposed to domestic violence at home are also victim of abuse. They are at risk of long-term physical and mental health issues. We all know that. The trauma they bring with them, that goes a long way. And then we also have we know that if the cycle of violence is not break at one point, it's going to continue to generation and generation and generation. And I think that's something, when a child witnesses domestic violence, they will feel that, okay, my mother was a good woman and she stayed in that relationship. So I have to fight the same way and stay. Even so, this is creating a wrong example to children as well. Obviously, the long-term risk, as I mentioned, the mental health of it. It obviously develop anxiety and depression on children who have witnessed that in the family. So for that, we offer free youth leadership programs, both for girls and boys in the community, because we know some of them have been through this and have seen it. We want to create a safe space for these children who can come and share and ask for help, so that we can connect them with resources. In our youth program, we raise a lot of awareness about around domestic violence, but also sexual assault and dating violence. In majority of our communities, we do not talk about dating violence. We say that, oh, we are Muslim, we are Afghan, our kids are not allowed to date, and we feel that they are not dating. So we do a lot of education around that as well to our youth in the community. Next, please. Resources that we provide for the community. Obviously, calling 911 will be the last resort for people who we know of or in life-threatening situations. We ask the woman to make sure to document the abuse and get medical help. We always tell them we have an hotline that the community can reach out if they need to at any point. Our case manager, our mental health counselor, and our teachers and our attorneys, they are all trained on domestic violence. Anyone who joined the organization has to go through an intense training on domestic violence, no matter what your job is, because we do not know how can we support the community. Maybe a client who comes for immigration services, as I said earlier, may feel very comfortable talking to our immigration attorney and start sharing about it. So we want to make sure that our immigration attorney is equipped with education and knowledge that do the immediate assistance. Then obviously the caseworker and case managers will get into it and solve the issue. Our empowerment classes, somebody I just saw pop up that it's available out of state. We currently are having it only for New York, but in the future we are planning to do virtually for people anywhere in the state. Yes. Next slide, please. So,
sorry, I think something must have crashed. I'll try to get that back up.
That's okay. It's also for the resources. We always provide the community with the national domestic violence hotline, but also a New York City hotline that people can reach out in case they cannot reach out to us for any reason. But they also obviously feel a lot of the community members at the beginning was not feeling calling 911 because obviously police in Afghanistan is not the people that would help you when it comes to domestic violence. And to change that notion and to change that culture and explaining to them how the police here in the state will be helping the community. We had a few sessions of bringing the local NYPD officers from our local precinct who are in the domestic violence unit to come and talk so that the community could feel comfortable around them. But also similarly, our staff went to the precinct and gave a short training to their, for the first one, we gave a 1-hour training on the cultural competency, and when it came to the Afghan families and how could they deal with, because we had reported cases of when a woman went to prison to report, when she called and she got the police at their door, the police asked her brother-in-law to translate, who was the brother of abuser. Or the police called actually in one case the abuser himself to say what was happening, and then all the blame went back to the woman. So because of those situations, we made sure to make a relationship with the local precinct where the majority of Afghan locals live here in Queens, to give them training, but also tell them how they have resources through Women for Afghan Women, that if they're in need of an interpreter, how they can reach out. Is that, I think, the last slide?
Yes, I think so. That's the last one I have.
yeah, the resources is, I think, the last slide that we had. I'm here to answer any question, but also give you a little bit the background of the community that you will be receiving now as the Afghan evacuees who are getting out of the bases. Obviously, they are very different from any other refugee community that we have received in the past. This group of people have been through a lot. Many people have been separated from their family members. Obviously, majority of them left Afghanistan when they had no access to their bank account or to their own life-saving money. They just left Afghanistan with nothing. They brought no clothes. They were only allowed to bring a small backpack. So for majority of them now sitting in the base, being back on the minute they left Afghanistan, they all were thankful of leaving that situation and being in a better place. But I think now brings back a lot of the things that they left behind. Many of them had good jobs, beautiful houses, and all of a sudden they are living in a tent in a base that really cannot help them. The Afghan, all the Afghans who are on the bases are not refugees. Some of them are under refugee status. Some of them are in parolee visas, and those parolee visas needs to be changed. The people have to go through change of status. There is right now a bill in Congress that hopefully be passed. That will be Adjustment Act. That these Afghans will be Afghan Adjustment Act. That their status will automatically be they will automatically be given residency in United States and then a path to citizenship. But if that does not pass, then these people who are on parole visa, which is a 2-year visa, stay visa in United States, they will go through a change of status. They have to apply for, if they have family members, through family petition. If not, they have to apply for asylum. The Afghan evacuees, everybody who left Afghanistan and came through the evacuee program, they are eligible for public benefits. Because they are, there was a bill passed a couple of months ago where these people are considered, they're not refugees, but they will get the benefits of a refugee. So they are eligible for Medicaid, for food stamp or SNAP, and they will also be able to work. That's the group that you all will be dealing with in the next few months. I'm here if there is any question that I could answer. Shirley, should I go to the chat, read the questions, or will you get the questions to me?
Hi, Nahid. Yes, so there's a couple of questions in the chat box, and then there's currently some questions in the Q&A also. Are you able to see that? Would it be helpful if I read those to you?
Can you read it, please? Yes, that would be helpful.
So from the Q&A box, somebody is asking, do you have advice on how to manage multiple wives? How can they be protected in case of violence when they are not considered a wife under US law? Has your organization managed this in the past?
We have not witnessed that, but we may get it with the new families. I mean, obviously under this law, there is only one wife that's supposed to be with them here. How can we deal with it? I think it's important that has to be reported, no matter how it will hurt the husband, unfortunately, but it has to be reported. I think in those cases, especially because they have lied because of the immigration status of having two wives and bringing one and another, they will always be threatening that wife because of the immigration status.
Thank you. And then another question, are your services available to any Afghan women in any part of the USA? And I know earlier somebody had asked about if Zoom classes, empowerment classes are available out of state.
So our services are right now, what we do with the refugee communities, we have been providing Afghan evacuees temporary housing for at least a month in an Airbnb. ground transportation through Uber, cash assistance, $300 per person, but that grant we ran out of it. We also have been providing families, so that is nationwide. We do those services anywhere. We also support the survivor of domestic violence anywhere in the United States. We do not have physical location, so we usually connect them to a domestic violence service provider in their area, but our caseworkers will still be as a caseworker with them over the phone to do interpretation, translation of documentation, or any other support that the client needs. We are expanding, and we are opening our office now in Virginia. We will hopefully be opening our office March 1st in Virginia. We're in the process of hiring. So the services can be done nationwide. But if, like, for example, a client needs to be in a shelter or needs a mental health counselor to see them, then we can definitely connect them with their local service providers. But we will still be a support for them. For our classes, as I mentioned earlier, right now, because of the pandemic, all our classes are through Zoom. But because it's a city-funded grant for the classes, we only have it for New York City, but we were thinking of expanding that. Once we go to Virginia, we start ESL classes that will be nationwide. However, our citizenship classes, because it's a federal grant, we are able to do that for anyone, anywhere in the United States. We also apply for citizenship for clients who are anywhere in the United States, and we can work through email and online with them.
Next question. There's also airport marriages that occurred. It would be helpful to hear more about what this looks like and how to address domestic violence in these cases. Some of the women left these men while in the camps, but others have stayed. Airport marriages.
So I heard a lot about women leaving their husbands when they came to here, especially those who have been given forced marriages, as well as people who have been given, I know a group of young girls who were sold to the Taliban, and then the Taliban sold them to someone else, and they were forcibly married to these husbands who came here to the United States, and then they were taken away from them. About the incidence of domestic violence in the base, I'm sure majority of you know, is a very huge issue. We have been providing sessions to the female contact staff who are working one-on-one with the women who are surviving, or if they see any sign of violence in those women. There were 25 of them. I provided a session with them, but also I provided a very short and brief session of understanding domestic violence to a group of 250 women in Fort Dix. We are planning to continue doing that once a week with each group of the women, and I will be taking with me an imam who will be doing a session for men every week. Again, these imams are the people who have been through our training and have an understanding of domestic violence and can provide resources.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next question. I'm working with Afghan refugees. I get a sense that some of our clients are experiencing domestic violence. What's the best culturally responsive way to address domestic violence?
I think the best way is talking to them. Again, educating them. They may not recognize it as a domestic violence. Talking to them as saying what are forms of domestic violence, and there are consequences. That's something that we are teaching the man in the base, that any of action that you have here in the United States will have consequences, and especially domestic violence. And then I think let them open up. I don't think we can get them talk about that until we do not educate them. So the best way to do it, educate them around it and see how comfortable they feel to talk to you. Obviously, the most important thing is building that trust with the woman, that what they share with you will be confidential. I also do not want you to like right away call, unless it's a life-threatening situation, to call the police if the woman do not want that to happen. So and many of our clients, they do want to stay in the marriage, unfortunately, even if it's very bad. But we work around that to make sure to give both the husband and wife the education that they can have a peaceful life.
Hopping over to the chat box questions for a second, there are a lot of questions coming in. So if somebody asks, what are the most common mistakes we are making when working with Afghan evacuees and refugees? I'm not sure if this is specifically in a domestic violence context, but if, you know, I don't want to.
I think the common mistakes we make when we work with an Afghan woman is we underestimate, we do not know the power of an Afghan woman, their resilience, they're powerful. They just need the tool and just polishing, and that's it. The second thing that we do, if it's in the context of domestic violence, the second thing would be mixing religion with culture. A lot of people mix culture with religion, and if they see it's the husband, the father beat up their mother, and now they're experiencing the same thing, they say that, oh, my mother said in Islam it's okay. There is nowhere in Islam that allows a man to hit a woman or a woman to hit a man, or in any case, no violence. But just majority of the time, because that was the wrong culture that people had, they mix it with religion. And once people would understand that's wrong, they will stop it. The third thing that we do is the language. Pashto and Dari are very different languages. It's totally two different languages. It's like speaking English and speaking Spanish. So we should not assume all Afghans can speak both languages. They can speak either or. There is only maybe a small number of people who have been educated and can understand both, but not fully.
And could you please let us know about gender culture norms, which might conflict with US gender norms? Through education, would a human rights discussion help bridge the divide?
There is definitely a huge divide when it comes to gender. And back in Afghanistan, men are always the ones who will be heard, the ones who will be making the decisions at home, the ones who would be or the most powerful at home. And women are always considered, almost always, I shouldn't say always, almost always on that she has to stay home, bring kids, and cook and clean. But I know definitely that's not the case in every part of Afghanistan, but in majority part. Obviously, in bigger cities that is different. And I mean, you see me in Afghanistan, my father would honestly educate my sisters more, would be worried about our education more than my brothers. He would say, my girls are going to get married and be in someone else's house. I want them to be independent and be on their own. So there are amazing men like my father who really work for their daughters. But there are also men who only, and even mothers who prefer their sons and give obviously the priority and attention to their sons more than the daughters. So I think that can change once they are here. I think the culture is different, and hopefully through education that would change, and there should not be that differences.
Somebody asks, if we have clients who have children interested in the youth leadership program, what's the best way to get them in contact with your organization?
I will put my email address in our youth program coordinator's email address in the chat box, and feel free to reach out. It's always, you can always, with any request, you can always reach out to also office@womenforafghanwomen.org. With those emails will definitely come to us. So I'm going to type it for you all, and you can reach out and we will get them registered. And definitely that will be, we are currently working, actually today we are starting a program with unaccompanied Afghan minors, and we are giving them a mentorship program. They are actually coming to our center at 4 o'clock to go through our youth leadership program, and then we connect them with our mentors.
Thank you, I appreciate that. There's a couple of questions around minors who are married. Let me just scroll a little bit. Somebody is asking, have you worked with women that have been married before the age of 18, around 13 or 14? How do you walk the line between being non-judgmental and also letting them know this is illegal in the US?
I mean, with anyone we work, if you're in the field of working with survivors of gender-based violence, we need to be, we should not be judgmental. We do not understand what they went through and what background and issues they had. And my mother got married when she was 12. So I cannot judge others. But also for all of us understanding that's also happening in the United States. Let's not forget, there are states still that you can get married at a very young age with the consent of your parent. It's not only Afghanistan, it's everywhere in the world. We are just now, last year, I think maybe 2 years ago, we changed that law in New York and New Jersey, but there are many other states are still, kids are getting married as young as 12 with the consent of their parents. So nothing new in that. And I don't think it's illegal everywhere in the United States. So one thing I wanted to bring there, it's also, for Afghanistan, as I mentioned, the situation is different. There was war. We cannot judge families again, why they had to do this. But we are here to help and support. And how can they change that right now? And how can we, again, I mean, education is the key for any factor. Educate the community, let them know what are the bad effects of having a child to be married at that young age, and what will happen to them, and how many other things can be stopped because in their life because of that young age marriage. So and again, Afghans are very open to accept of once they are being educated the right way. They do the best they can with the limited resources they had back there.
Thank you. So similarly, somebody is asking, I've worked in a situation where a child was sent back to Afghanistan to get married before the age of consent in an arranged marriage. How do you best support the child and the family?
So we have many cases. We had a young case of, actually, she was not Afghan, she was from Pakistan. And she was sent back to Pakistan and got married to her first cousin when she was 13 years old. And she came back here and she was able to legally sponsor her husband to come to United States. Again, this is not illegal in United States. Let me just clarify that. The age for marriage is not, all states do not have 18 and older. What the reason why we started our youth leadership program in 2005 was because we saw a rise in getting young girls out of school and sending them back to Afghanistan or Pakistan for underage marriages. And the reason why we started that, we started to educating not only the families, but also the youth about their rights and about underage marriages. And since then, over 500 girls have been through our youth program. None of them have been taken out of school. None of them have been forcibly married or underage or got married underage. So again, what we can do as an advocacy or service provider, we can just educate them and let them know what is right and wrong. And the states that are illegal, but the states that are legal, they still through federal government, there is no age limit for getting married. So I know of people being married at 13 and 14 and were able to sponsor and bring their husbands to the United States.
Thank you. And you have a shout out in the chat. Thank you for bringing attention to youth marriages in the USA. Yeah, I think that's so important to make that kind of clarification that it's not, it happens here, and so does domestic violence. It happens here, as we all know, unfortunately. So the next question, at the camps, men documented their wives as sisters or cousins that are part of the family composition. In instances of violence, I fear that those women will not come forward about the violence, and since they don't fall under Bawa's self-petitioning, do they have any recourse?
That's when I mentioned earlier also, that's the fear that the women do not come forward because of their legal status. If they're brought here as their wife, as their sister or cousins or any other relationship, and they're in reality their wife, we cannot do that. But if there is a way that the woman can make it known to their caseworker or somebody that they work with that they are the real wife, even if they have an Afghan marriage certificate, which is called Nekonoma. If they have that, I think at least in New York, I know that we can work with that and get our visa through VAWA, but U visa. But I do not know how is it in other states. Again, the fear is real, and in many cases, unfortunately, if they do not let us know, we may not be able to help them.
And what is your advice on sending money back to family members who are still in hiding? Many of them did help the Americans and did not get out. Yeah,
I still do it. I have still my families. My cousins are still in Afghanistan. My aunts, my uncles. I feel responsible because they haven't been getting paid for the past 6 months. So how are they going to survive? They were teachers, they were doctors, and now they're sitting home without pay. If you can, please do it. I know it's also risky for people to get money out from the bank. There's a limit into it. Only a person can take out of only $200 per month from the bank if you send them to Western Union. I don't think there is any other mean of sending money to Afghanistan right now. MoneyGram and Western Union, I think, are the only one that are sending money back in Afghanistan. If you can and if you're able to do it, please do, because people are suffering in Afghanistan. It has been months, people haven't been paid, and the winter is really bad there. So there's a lot of people who are displaced because of the internal war when it happened before August 15 in some of provinces, and people moved from provinces and came to Kabul. They're literally living under the tent without eat. So it's a terrible situation. And people, I'm sure you have been reading in the news, are selling their young kids or now selling their parts of body or kidney or in all of that in order to provide food for the rest of the family.
And what's the best way of getting the money there? I know you mentioned Western Union.
Western Union and MoneyGram are the only ones that I think people are getting money back to Afghanistan. And the Western Union, when you send it, they will be able to collect it from a bank, a local bank. But there's also, again, a limit of $200 per month if you're sending it per person. So if I'm sending, for example, for one cousin, $200, I cannot send for the next 30 days, anything else.
And then a follow-up question, is it okay for sponsors to give our families money to send?
Sorry, I didn't get that question again.
Is it okay for sponsors to give our families money to send?
Yes, why not?
Nahid, I want to add that could also, whoever asked this question, it could also depend on their organizational culture, what they decide is should be done.
So if it's I think sponsors are people who have worked with the Afghans in Afghanistan, so they're sponsoring them here. Is that what you mean? then the sponsor family can do if they want to. I'm not talking about organization. Well, I'm not discussing that. I'm talking individually if people can do.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
If so because of families who came here and family who are coming through a special immigrant visa, those are people who work with American ties here, American citizens. And if they're sponsoring a family inside Afghanistan, and if they want to send money to them, they can. That's what I meant.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for the clarification. Oh, a little bit more from this commenter. They say, we've been giving money on and off. The father was a doctor. We as a sponsor group have offered to send money.
Yeah.
Thank you. What about human trafficking? Have you seen any increase in human trafficking with the Afghan refugees? And if so, are there any signs of human trafficking with Afghan refugees that are often missed due to cultural differences?
I haven't seen anything, but I think the diaspora community here in the US have been really trying to figure out if there are people, because that chaotic evacuation could end, anything could happen during that time. So yeah, nothing that has been reported or I'm aware of it.
Okay. There's a couple of questions around resources. I know there's a resource list up on the screen, but do you have any translated resources or recommendations of where to find resources, especially audio or translated resources?
I can email you. I can email it to you, and then maybe you can send it to the group. I do have some of the materials that the Afghan diaspora have been translating, and I can share that with you all.
Perfect. Yeah. So if you can email a list to me, I can kind of compile it and share it with everybody in the follow-up email. We can put it on our website as well.
Sure.
Thank you for that. Yeah, there's a couple of questions around resources. And then scrolling back up again, I thought I saw, can you touch on getting the woman into the workforce and some of the challenges apart from language in doing that?
I think this group of Afghan through evacuation is a very big mix of people. We have a lot of Afghans who have been highly educated, having degrees and speaking fluent English. But then we also have in the mix people who haven't been to school or just had elementary school and not formal education. And for them, I think, but I just want to make one thing clear that many of these women are really well skilled. And we have worked with many in the past here at our organization. And what we do once we know what are they skilled at, we do give them official trainings on that and get them to be back in workplace. And a majority of the women that we work with start working for the very first time in their life here. They are amazing cooks. Any Afghan woman, I would say 99% of Afghan women can cook really well food, and they're really amazing caregivers and babysitters. They are also so these are the things that we would give them official trainings and send them, but also at the same time, we encourage the woman to go get back to school. Somebody who had never been to school, one of the girls who came like 3 years ago here to United States and went to our ESL classes, we were able to manage to get her to do her GED. She just got her GED in December, and she was a person who had never been to school in her life, and now we are getting her to go to college and hopefully be able to get her higher education and get back to work. So there's obviously, it takes a little bit longer than we would do it with other communities, because especially for people who have never worked, but just getting them, if we know what they are skilled at, just give them an official, a proper training on that, a formal training on those skills, and they will be able to work pretty well.
That's great. And someone wrote in the comments that a number of the women are also amazing tailors and can sew, also rug makers and other artisans.
Yes, yeah, there's many of them are really well skilled, and obviously rag making, tailoring, and all of that. It's you just need to find what they are good at, and just in no time they will be on their own and working with one of most amazing designers. You just need to polish them a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We had a woman in the center who's working now in Manhattan with a designer, and she's making more than her husband. So yes, it happens.
It's amazing. So moving on to the next question, it's about cooperation with law enforcement. How do your clients in New York overcome the requirement to cooperate with law enforcement? They do not contact law enforcement to report DV.
I think I just mentioned earlier a little bit that for us, really making anything for the community to feel comfortable around us, educate them, bring that, bringing the NYPD officers here to do a few sessions, explain to them, not specifically on domestic violence. They would talk about other forms that they could reach out if their kids are having issues at school, if they know that the kids have been given, for example, something wrong in the school, or how can they report it, how can they talk it, and then slowly they would tie that into domestic violence. And we brought the domestic violence unit from NYPD precinct that's close to us, and they came and talked. I think making them feel comfortable around law enforcement. Not everybody feels comfortable around police, especially people who are coming from countries like Afghanistan. The police is not really helping people who are survivors of domestic violence in Afghanistan, and unfortunately the police was very corrupt, and so people have really hard time to trust the authorities. But I think just making them feel comfortable and educating them how the system is different here, I think that may help. People do call 911 when there are obviously risk of their life or children's life at a situation at home. They do, and they've been pretty open now than they were like 5 years ago.
Right. And I think, folks in general, many do not feel comfortable contacting the police.
Yes.
Just immigrants, not just refugees. There's a couple of great resources being shared in the chat. I can roll those up into the follow-up email as well. So thank you to everybody who's leaving resources, and keep putting them in there if you know of any great resources. Let me see. I know you maybe touched on this earlier, but there's still a couple of questions around reports of children being sold in Afghanistan, to become domestic servants.
Yes, there is a huge crisis in Afghanistan right now. There is literally United States has put a sanction in Afghanistan, and they are not they freeze the accounts, the money that was supposed to be for the government. So as I mentioned, the teachers, the doctors, and all of them have not been paid. People who are having bigger, like they are selling one child in order to save others. I know it's not justifiable, it's not right. But for them to just stay alive and keep the other kids alive, they have been selling kids. I had just mentioned earlier that I just heard of a terrible incident this morning from somebody in Afghanistan that she knew of a family who sold their kidneys, and their kidneys were sent to another country, and they got money for it, just in order to survive. So it's a very unfortunate situation, but it's happening. And there is really not many humanitarian hates going in Afghanistan, and that's really hitting people bad. Unfortunately, in all this mess of the US and the Taliban, the people who are hurting the most are the poor people inside the country.
Right, and I know a lot of evacuees and refugees here are still very worried for their family back in Afghanistan. Which connects to a question that's left in the chat. Do you have advice for the refugees who are here who are worried about their family and kids back in Afghanistan. Is there something that's best for them to do or advice that you have?
I wish I would. There is nothing going on. I mean, we applied for over 50 individuals, humanitarian parole visas. We only have gotten no's from here from the immigration. So before I would tell them, okay, let's apply for humanitarian visas. Maybe they can go to another country, neighboring country, and be able to get here. Unfortunately, I do not advise that too, because the fees is expensive and no one has gotten a yes on their application. Over 30,000 Afghans and have applied for it. There's also not much evacuation happening right now. Germany is only getting some of the people out of through Pakistan, but that's also they are doing it with a limited group of people that they want to get out. So I wish there would have been. I mentioned I still have family and I have no way to get them out.
All right, thank you for sharing that. I don't think there's any other outstanding questions. I think most you've touched upon. If anybody, participants have any other questions, feel free to drop them in either the chat or the Q&A box for Naheed. I'm gonna take a quick scroll back and see. Yeah, I think we got most of them.
Yeah, I think Yalda wrote one of the question, if we could do an education around domestic violence for men. I just mentioned we will be doing, starting April, we will be doing a series of sessions with men inside the base. We are doing it both with men and women, separate sessions. I think we should not always educate only the woman on domestic violence and let the man do whatever they want. And that brings more pressure on women, because they understand their rights, and then the other person that they live with who was abusing them do not understand about that. So I think it's always important to educate men as well, and that's what we will be start doing it, at least with one base as of now that's closer to us in New Jersey, that hosts about 12,000 Afghan evacuees right now.
Yes, thank you for adding that.
Thank you everyone for attending this session and being engaged in all that you're doing every day to help this community. And please feel free if you had additional questions to the email that I wrote. It's office@womenforafghanwomen.org. I will also we will also send the contact information in a follow-up email to all of you.
Thank you. Yeah, I will send the recording of this session and the slides and any of the resources that were shared or mentioned to everybody, as well as that contact info. Again, feel free to get in touch with us. And thank you so much, Naheed, for taking the time out. I know you're completely slammed, with everything that's been happening, and just to be here today and taking the time to share with our networks. If you have any last thoughts or anything you want everyone to know, feel free to just go ahead and shout that out. Otherwise,
yeah, I want to thank obviously Sarah, Monica, and you, Shirley, for all that you have been doing in arranging this session and being on top of it to happen. So thank you so much. But also for everybody who has attended, please reach out to your community and ask them to open their homes for the refugee families, to open their businesses, hire them, house them. They need it. And I promise you will not regret doing that, because a large number of them are amazing people who will do really good for this country.
yes, well said. Thank you. And if you have any other resources, this is for Naheed or anybody in the who's here today, please share them with me so I can share them with the group as well. I should put my email in the chat. I'm missing a G at the end, sorry. Feel free to get in touch at any time. Thank you so much. So since there's no other questions or outstanding comments, I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar today. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll be in touch. Thank you, Nahid.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good one.